Torna a fer amb ciència, una sèrie fonamental per repensar el feminisme, la història i la cultura científica. Aquesta temporada tindrà 2 blocs, cultura material i formes de comunicar la història de la ciència. Cadascun estarà format per 4 entrevistes i una taula rodona on conversarem amb totes les entrevistades.
Avui contem amb Sophie Gerber, investigadora i conservadora de la secció de Tecnologies de la Llar i el Menjar del Technisches Museum Viena. Els seus temes d'estudi es centren en la cultura material, la història i la tecnologia dels segles XX i XXI i els estudis de gènere i queers. Destacar que actualment en el Technisches Museum Viena tenen una exposició online sobre les dones de la feina, en motiu del 150è aniversari del primer pavelló femení a la Fira Mundial de Viena.
És la història de la ciència i la tecnologia sexista?
Yes, I think so. Sure it is, to be honest. And I think this especially becomes clear when visiting a museum of science and technology to see which histories are on display. The history of science and especially the history of technology is still, I think, generally told as a history of males, of white people, of male ingenuity, so to say, and technological objects, which are the sources I mostly work with, are still considered, as we like to say, big toys for boys, while the mutual constructions of gender and technology, including also queer histories, which are a very important part of my work, are often marginal. And we try to focus more on questions of gender in the context of the history of technology and its display, its communication, because at least I am convinced that technology is a universal concern and encompasses gender in all its diversity. Everyone has to do with gender all day long and technology as well. And I think we have to ask new and different questions and look at objects and material culture from different perspectives. But in museums and also in museums of technology, the problem is, of course, that you mostly have this one perspective on display. You can tell this one history, one story, but as a historian, you know that this is not how history is made and how history is to be should be seen. It's always a history of different perspectives, and I think the perspective of women and queer people is still underrepresented, and that makes the history of technology or museums of technology especially kind of sexist up to this day.
Com s'hauria de commemorar la ciència? Què n'opines del Dia Internacional de la Dona i la Nena a la Ciència?
Well, there are different approaches, of course. In museums, or especially in the Vienna Museum of Technology, we try to communicate, especially the history of technology in connection with gender, especially on days such as this. But this is, of course, a very, very easy strategy, a short-term strategy. Permanent galleries and museums are much larger projects, which need much more time, of course, also money and investment, resources, where it is much more difficult to create change, to include histories that were marginal to this day. So we've tried to include a feminist perspective on technology and on the galleries, with the first step years ago with kind of an intervention, which is called like the Women's Gallery. So we have portraits of female scientists, women in technology, in the permanent galleries, and tell their stories there. But of course, this is also kind of problematic because you also highlight these women without reflecting other categories, like, for example, class or race, because a second look shows that most of these women are, of course, again, white and from the bourgeois class. So on the one hand, this is a very effective first step. It was for us, but on the other hand, it has to go deeper. And of course, our main goal is to include the category of gender in all areas of museum work, all areas of our daily work, not only the exhibition work, but it takes a lot of time.
Per què s'acostumen a presentar les mateixes dones científiques al llarg de la història?
I think it's especially to communicate these histories to children or the youth. On the one hand, they need role models, and on the other hand, they also need to understand how the history of technology is written. So I think it's useful to have these histories, and this was the first step for us in regards to the Women's Gallery. But another step, some years later, in 2019, when I started working here, we expanded the gallery, but not with biographies, but with a more with another approach regarding the history of women's education in Austria, because it was also the centenary of women having the possibility to study at the technical university. So we didn't ask any more who are the women in science and technology, but we've asked what struggles did they have, what problems did they encounter over the last, 200 years. And so we focused more on women, their education, and also their working conditions, including housework and care work. So this is also part of the Women's Gallery, but we won't expand the gallery any further, because we are very optimistic that in the upcoming permanent galleries, you don't need this intervention anymore, because an intervention is only useful when you have an exhibition where gender is not present, but in the upcoming exhibitions it will be present, so we don't need the intervention anymore. So it's a process, I think.
Les paraules claus i els tesaurus segueixen patrons i estructures de pensament sexistes, eurocèntriques i racistes. Com és possible la documentació dinàmica d'una col·lecció?
We started to create a gender-informed vocabulary to document our objects. And we can do that because our whole thesaurus is from our museum. We created the thesaurus ourselves, so to say, over the past decades already, with revisiting the collections, which is an active process you have to start. But we revisit the objects, the collections, and the thesaurus regularly, so to say, because things change their meaning. They change their meaning when they come into the collections, or when we discover new sources, and the vocabulary changes its meaning, of course. Language is dynamic, and especially in the German language, there are a few specifics which are widely discussed, especially in the last months and years. And language is a very key issue we have to deal with regarding gender and the documentation of our objects in the database. And I think this is makes the dynamics of it, that we revisit and review this work regularly, and try to adapt new perspectives on things, so to overcome this one-dimensionality, which was considered like objective for a long time, especially in museums of technology, because also technology was considered as something objective. And this is what we try to overcome, to make things, maybe more subjective, more multi-perspectival, is this even a word, to adapt more perspectives, and to discover more histories of the objects, and to reflect this in a database with keywords is one of our main challenges. And of course, databases are not really the best means to document stories from different perspectives, because they have a hierarchy. They dictate more or less how you can describe an object or not. So in the best case, the database is so flexible that you can work with it, but as the museum, as an institution, databases often are not that flexible, which is a problem for encounters like that. Yeah.
Podries explicar-nos en què consisteix la pràctica museística Fokus Gender?
So we started working with Fokus Gender in 2019. We then started to create a strategy how to implement gender as a category of analysis, as a category of our everyday work, and it has lots of parts, so to say. So it's really a package of strategies across the whole museum, with the center, I guess, on the collections. But it's not a project in the sense of having an objective, and when this is reached, we are finished. It's more like a long time strategy. So it's implemented in the collection strategy and also in the museum's mission statement. So it's more like of a self-understanding. It's part of the self-understanding of the museum, and it has no end, I guess. So,
Quin paper juguen els objectes i la cultura material en un enfocament feminista i queer?
So the objects, of course, are crucial for our work, because they are our main source, and I think to adapt a feminist and queer perspective on science and technology in museums means to discover stories by reflecting and revisiting those objects in this material culture. And I think it's important to emphasize the role of the objects as also active agents in shaping society and ideas of gender, and the other way around, because of course ideas of gender also shape the objects and material culture, and these co-constructions are, I think, crucial. On the other hand, with the objects always comes some kind of biography, the biography of the inventor maybe, or the designer, but also of the user. And another strategy is to talk to them and to discover their biographies. Objects are always in the center, but it's important to have those networks of agents, of actors, institutions. You always have to reflect the role of the museum as an institution, of course, as well. And not only its functionality, its design, whatever. This is important too, of course. But from my point of view, there are things even more important. Examples maybe for this would be a synthesizer. There is the great history and biography of Wendy Carlos, a trans woman who popularized the synthesizer as an electronic music instrument in the 1970s and 80s. It's a fascinating biography, and synthesizers were always, for a long time, they were on display in the museum, but nobody told the story.
Dankeschön, Sophie. Aquest ha estat el quart episodi de la tercera temporada de Fem Ciència. No us perdeu la següent taula rodona el dia 4 d'octubre. Fins aviat!